Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 6, Halacha 1. This is part 4 of this year. And today we're going to be getting into an interesting topic about how much is going to be this size of volume when you're going to take off a piece of the bread after you went and you made the bracha. Now, we were talking about this yesterday. If you go make a bracha and you have a piece of challah in front of you and you take off a piece of bread and then you make a bracha on the piece of bread that you're holding that you broke off, well, you didn't make the bracha on necessarily the rest of the stuff. You made it on that piece. And the problem is that if you're dropping the piece and the piece somehow gets lost, then you have all sorts of issues because you have a case where, well, maybe you didn't actually say the bracha on the whole bread, you said it on the piece, and then you might have to say a formula so that you don't have bracha lavatala and then go back and redo it. There's a lot of issues and complexity that comes up if you're going to break the bread first and then you're going to say a bracha. But the way we do it today is we say the bracha first on the bread and then we break off a piece. Why are we doing that? Because we don't want to get into this complexity of these sorts of issues where you're breaking it off first, and then it could be like that you've set it on the piece of bread that you broke off first, and then then if something happens where that thing is gone, what's going to be the status of it? And in a place where maybe you don't have the most learned people in the world, maybe they don't know the formula on making sure that it's not bracha lavatala. So it's not a big deal to just institute where you're doing the bracha as a like it was a way of doing it where you're doing it on the bread first and then you're going to be breaking off a piece. Now, what is going to be the size of the piece that you break off, and how is that going to work? Gemara now talks about the size of the piece that's broken off when the Hamotzi blessing is made, and the Gemara reads up to how much, in other words, how small a piece may one break off from the loaf after you say the blessing. In other words, the law is that one should not break off a piece larger than the size of an egg, and if you do it, the Rambam says in Hilchos Barachos 7.3 that it appears gluttonous, so it's not really good derech eretz to do. And if you break off too small a piece, says the Rambam, it appears to be miserly. In other words, appears to be very stingy. So now the Haredim is pointing out that the Gemara is going to inquire up to how small the piece should be so that he doesn't appear to be cheap and miserly. Now, you can also find that this gets paralleled in the Or Chaim 167. So Rabbi Hinena and Rabbi Manna dispute the matter. One says up to an olive's volume. In other words, you can break off a piece as small as the size of an olive, but no smaller. And the other one says up to less than an olive's volume. In other words, there's no minimum measure, says the other one. Now, the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning of these two opinions. The one who says up to an olive's volume is in agreement with what we learned in a Mishnah elsewhere regarding the baked menachos. Now, in the menachos, those are going to be flour offerings, and you can see more about that in the Torah itself, in Leviticus chapter 2, and it goes out through the whole formula of it in Pasuk 1 through 11. And some of these, there's a lot of types of it. You can see more about this in Masechet Menachos 75b. Some come as actual flour. Some are brought after the flour is baked in an oven. Some are fried. They do it either in a flat pan or a deep pan. There's two different kinds of these fried breads. One's in a very, very deep pan, one's in a flat pan. So in the case of menachos, all the menachos whose remainder is eaten has to go with kamitza. Kamitza, the Gemara in Menachos says, is one of the hardest halachot to understand. This is going to be the formula where and it's also one of the hardest halachot to actually perform. That's what the Masechet says in Menachos. And basically, they're holding the flour in their hand. They have to make a special kind of fist that turns the hand into a measuring cup and come up with the exact size. And without this this hand being turned into like a measuring device, you end up with the wrong measurement for how much it's supposed to be. And so then you have a problem because you didn't actually bring that amount that's required in the Torah. It's one of the most difficult pieces to do, one of the most difficult halachas. Now, normally the way it would work is they would, so they take their middle fingers and they turn into this like measuring thing, like a scoop or something, and then they fill it up, and the portion of the mincha is going to be scooped out in a manner called a kometz, and that's going to be burnt on the altar. Now, the point about this is that this amount has to be exact because you're putting it on the altar, and we always have this worry about blemished offerings, and if you're putting in something that's not required, in other words, it's going to be too little, or it's going to be blemished, or it's going to be too much, you have all sorts of problems about bringing problematic offerings. So it really has to be exact. The menachos are going to be basically baked or fried, and that's going to happen before this happens with the hand, and before they're going to put this offering onto this flour offering onto the altar. Now, the Mishnah over there in Menachos, and also the Rambam talks about it in Hilchos Masa HaKorbanos in 13:10, is saying that the Mishnah there teaches that they are broken down into olive-sized pieces. Now, this is going to be this rabbi's source on how we're going to know it's an olive-sized piece, because it's going to come back to this what's going to be offered, before they're allowed to eat the menachos. In other words, they're going to have the bread, but they have to take the flour offering that was used for the bread and then offer that on the altar. But it has to be this exact amount with the hand. And it's apparently going to end up to be in olive-sized pieces. So the Gemara reads, one who says up to an olive's volume is in accordance with that which we learned in the Mishnah elsewhere regarding the baked menachos. These aren't the fried ones, these are the baked ones. And all of them, the baked menachos, are broken into olive-sized pieces. And it was taught in a Brisa that the Kohanim recites the Chomotzi Lechem in Haaretz blessing when eating the mincha. So the Haredim points out that this Brisa is also going to be cited in the Bavli 37b. And he points out that since the Mishnah states that the mincha is broken only into olive-sized pieces, but no smaller, the Haredim points out that we learn that it is considered miserly to break off and eat a piece smaller than a kazite when reciting the Hamotzi blessing. That's going to be the idea. And this is where it comes from. It comes from the offerings itself. Now the Gemara is going to present the other side. And it's going to say, and the one who says that one may break off up to less than an olive's volume cites proof for the following. It says, for Rabbi Yishmael taught in a Brisa, he crushes the baked mincha even further until he returns it to its flour state. Now, the Haredim is going to explain this, and he's going to say Rabbi Yishmael disagrees with the Mishnah cited above, which states that in Pesischa, the mincha is broken only into the olive-sized pieces, and maintains that the baked menachos are crushed into fine meal before the kamitza. Now, the Haredim points out that he too presumably agrees with the Brisa that the Kohen recites the Hamotzi blessing when eating the menachos, and we learn that it is not considered miserly to break off even a piece smaller than a kazite when reciting the Hamotzi blessing. The Or Chaim in 167.1 explains the Yerushalmi's linkage in this dispute between the Mishnah and Rabbi Yishmael differently, and it's going to go like this: that the dispute between Rabbi Hinena and Rabbi Mana is basically whether the piece broken off may be smaller than a kazite, and that's a question of manners, whether it's going to be appearing to be miserly to break off such a small piece. That's going to be the idea that's presented in 167.1. Now, there are other Rishonim who have a different idea about what's happening here. The Ravia, in his commentary in Berechot, Seif 103, explains the issue as one of a proper blessing. In other words, it's not a thing of manners, it's actually going to be proper. And it's going to be whether basically the Baracha Rishonah over the piece of bread smaller than a kazite is hamotzi, or whether the piece is small and it loses its special status of bread, as in the case would be with mezonot and not hamotzi. That's also an interesting idea to consider. Now, the Gemara is going to cite a general rule for when the hamotzi blessing is recited. And by the way, in both of those opinions, if you broke off an olive-sized piece, there would be no problem, because on one size it says that you can go up to an olive-sized piece. So you can do less, but you can go up to. That means an olive-sized piece. And the other one says don't go smaller than an olive-sized piece, which means you can do an olive-sized piece. So there's an agreement there that it should be done with an olive-sized piece. And presumably both schools would be doing an olive-sized piece. The question comes in, well, can you do a smaller one or can you do a bigger one? That's going to be what the dispute is. But presumably there's no dispute in that they're both doing an olive-sized piece and that they allow for an olive-sized piece, because one is doing up to and one is doing no lower than an olive-sized piece. And as we see from the Rambam, if you're breaking off a piece that's greater than an egg, then it's considered to be gluttonous and it's not proper manners. Now, it was taught in a Brisa, says the Gemara, any food for which we recite the three blessings, like Berechot Hamazon, after we eat it, we recite Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz before we eat it. So the Brisa is going to be following the sages in the Brisa that is going to be coming up, and the Mishnah that's going to be coming up, who's arguing with Rabban Gamliel, maintains that the three blessings of Berechot Hamazon are recited only after bread, and it states that any food over which one recites Berechot Hamazon, like any food that is classified as bread, occasions the Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz blessing. So that's something to keep note of. The Gemara continues, says, and any food that does not occasion the three blessings after it, one does not recite Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz before we eat it. In other words, the Hamotzi, the Berechot Hamazon blessing is what's going to help us to understand what are we going to be saying the bracha before on. In other words, if you have to say Birkat Hamazon after you eat it, that you have to be eating something that warrants the Hamotzi Lechem in Haaretz. Why? Because Birkat Hamazon is filled with references implying about something like what you would be eating with bread, what you'd be, with bread, and a lot of like themes that are connected to it. So the Gemara is going to question this rule, and the Gemara says they challenge this brisa with the following argument. Consider the case of one who eats less than an olive's volume of bread. One does not recite the three blessings, Birkat Hamazon, after it, as an after blessing is recited only after eating at least an olive's volume of food. In other words, the point is that if you ate less than an olive volume, it doesn't count as eating food. So you don't have to say a bracha over it. That's the argument there. Now again, all of this is not necessarily halacha l'maisa. This is talking about broader principles. And if you want to know more, check out the Or Chaim. It will give you a detailed explanation of what the halacha l'maisa will be. But meanwhile, we want to know these concepts because it helps us to think about this in a deeper way. For instance, we're thinking about menachos in terms of, what size do we eat and whether it's going to be turning on this mitzvah or not. And what would happen if you had something smaller than that amount? Would you have done the mitzvah when you're doing menachos? So that's like an idea of what we're covering. So again, this idea is that, that one has to be eating at least an olive's volume, in this case of bread, and that would be triggering the blessing after. The idea is that, if you ate less than an olive's volume, it's not considered to be like food that would require a blessing. This is the argument here. The Gemara continues, it says, shall we then say, according to the Brise's rule, that we should not recite Hamotzi Lechem in Haaretz before either, and why even the minutest amount of food requires a blessing beforehand? That's going to be the idea. So I want to point out something that comes from the Rashi. The Rashi is pointing out in the Bavli 35a parallel here that the bracha rishona blessing must be recited even over the smallest amount of food. And we can see here that the Brise's general rule is not going to be upheld with the halacha l'maisa. Now, all of this is going to be connected to Devarim. Now, if you look in Devarim 8:10, you're going to see these Doraita obligations. It says, and you will eat and be satiated, and you will bless Hashem, your God. So you have a double expression of God there in the same sentence. And that's filled with a lot of meaning because, God created you and he's sustaining you. And this double expression has a lot of meaning to it. The other thing about it is it has the word like satisfied or satiated. So then, what is that going to be meaning, right? So you also have this expression of eat in the Torah. And, what is that going to be? Is there going to be a minimum size that's going to qualify as eat for, understanding this pasuk here? So the Torah is basically commanding someone to recite this after blessing. After he eats, the question is going to be that, is it going to be at least a kazite? And, that's going to be, the question. In other words, we had this idea that the bracha rishona is going to be put there because it's forbidden to derive any pleasure in this world without first reciting a blessing over it. And, that's going to be why Rashi is going to be holding this idea that the bracha rishona must be recited over even a very small amount of food. That's That's the logic behind it. Now, the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says, the Brice's general rule was needed only to exclude other kinds of food. And what's that all about? So the Haredim says like this. Haredim says that the Brice does not intend to exclude one who eats less than the minimal amount necessary for Berechot Mazon from the blessing of Hamotzi. Rather, it intends only to exclude those kinds of food over which one does not recite Berechot Mazon from the blessing of Hamotzi. And the Brice's point, says Haredim, is that only over bread made from the 5 species of grain, like wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye, over which one recites Berechot Mazon, does one recite Hamotzi. And the Haredim says, over bread made from other species like rice or millet, all of which do not occasion the Berechot Mazon because they are not classified as bread, and therefore you don't say the Hamotzi blessing. So the Gemara now is going to have 2 contradictory rulings on dining etiquette, but it's going to get reconciled at the end. So just bear with me. So it goes like this. Rabbi Abba says in the name of Rav, those who are dining together are forbidden to taste even a bit of bread until the one reciting the blessing over the bread tastes it first. So the idea here is that, by the way, you can find out more about this in Or Chaim 167 in the 15th Seif. And the idea is that, okay, it's not proper for diners to pick off pieces of bread from a loaf over which the blessing is recited before, the first person reciting it, breaks off his own piece and eats from it. In other words, if the people are breaking off bread first before this person makes the bracha on it, he's doing a bracha on a broken loaf, and it's not really the ideal way to do it. Certainly not good manners. And there, basically what this is saying is they're saying that if you're the one reciting the blessing, cut up the bread and divide it among the group, they have to wait for him to begin eating his piece before they begin eating theirs. Now, this is also going to be what the Shulchan Aruch says, and this is also the consensus with the Bavli. No disagreement. Tosafot agrees with this. You can, by the way, see this in the Bavli parallel in Berechot, Bavli 47a. And the idea is that, a thing of doing things as a courtesy and doing things where, this person is given priority because he's the one doing the blessing first, and then he's completing the blessing by actually eating it. And it would be very strange for you to hear the blessing from this person, and then you're eating before even he completed the blessing by eating it. It's really not good manners. So we don't do things that way. We ideally, you make the bracha on the whole loaf. You pick off a piece, you eat it to complete the blessing, and then everybody else gets. Now, this is talking about something that's totally backwards, where people are taking this bread, picking off pieces of it, and then he says the blessing, and they're even eating the bread before he even puts the bread in the mouth. Well, it's really bad manners. And then you have all sorts of issues of, maybe, it's really not the best way to do a bracha. So you didn't even wait till he finished to put the thing in his mouth before you already started eating it. There's going to be a second ruling. And it's going to look like there's a disagreement with what Rav is saying. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, those drinking together may drink even though one reciting the blessing has not yet drunk. So This looks like it's saying the exact opposite, where, okay, this person says Kiddush, and before he even lifts the cup to put the cup to his lips, the other person already finished the cup. The person who heard the Kiddush already finished it. They all finished it. So that seems to be the opposite of what Rav is saying. Now the Gemara is going to ask this question. It's going to say, what? Can it be that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi disagrees with Rav's law? And the Gemara is going to explain that Rav and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi are actually not disagreeing, but they're talking about different cases. So the Gemara says, what Rav said, that it is forbidden for the others to eat before one recited the blessing, refers to one where they all tied to one loaf. That's, the idea here is that Rav is referring to where the entire group is eating from the same loaf of bread. And that way it would be proper for the other people in the group to wait for the first person who recited the blessing to actually complete the blessing by putting it in his mouth, the food in the mouth, and then he would distribute the pieces and everybody can then eat from it. And, but he's basically going to be distributing it and, having from the loaf first. That's going to be the idea here. Now, the Gemara says what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said is that it is permitted for others to drink before the one reciting the blessing, refers to where each one had his own cup in his hand. Now, the idea would be that, each cup is, in effect, a cup over which the blessing is recited, and it suffices for each one to drink from his own cup, since they do not need him to drink. They do not need the leader to drink from his cup because they have their own cup in front of them. It's unnecessary, basically, for him to drink first. That's the idea. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would agree that if everybody had bread, for example, in front of them, and one person did the blessing over the bread, but they weren't going to eat from the same loaf, well, it would be the same thing where, the person can take from his own loaf in front of him. That, I think, everybody would agree with. Now, it was customary at the time for all of the people at a meal to eat from the same loaf, but also it was a custom to drink from individual cups. So the Pnei Moshe points out that Rav and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi phrase their respective rulings in accordance with a common custom. So that's going to be, the idea here. So the Gemara is going to relate a teaching that's very similar, and this Gemara says, it was taught in a brisa, when a group dines together, the one who recites the Hamotzi blessing reaches first for the food of the subsequent courses. But if he wishes to bestow honor on his teacher or one who is greater than him in Torah by offering him to partake first of the subsequent courses, he may do so. So what this is saying is that, and by the way, you can see more about this in the Orach Chaim 167, but in contrast to eating the bread by itself, where it's forbidden for anyone else to eat the bread before the one who actually recited the blessing eats it, in regard to the other courses, the one who recited the blessing over the bread may honor someone else to partake first. So this again would be, talking about a case where, if somebody has a separate portion that's placed before each person at the dinner, then technically speaking, it's permissible for the diners to begin eating from their own portion in front of them as soon as they receive them. But if we're going to talk about manners, the diners should still wait for the person until the most prominent person eats first. But the person who is going to be eating before the most prominent person, he's going to be viewed as it's going to be in a derogatory term, but the term that's used is garon, which is a gorger, and that's also echoed in the Shulchan Aruch. It's somebody who, is going to be gorging himself. Now, the Vilna Goan has a little bit different take on all of this, and here's what the Vilna Goan says. Now, this is going to be in Beur Hagra, and it's in his commentary in the Shulchan Aruch. You can find that in 167. And he disagrees with the interpretation of the Brisa that is discussing the subsequent courses in the meal. And he says that, the Vilna Gaon says, in fact, that the Yerushalmi cites the Brisa in the midst of a series of laws pertaining to bread itself, indicating that the Brisa also refers to bread itself. And the Vilna Gaon interprets the Brisa to mean that the hamotzi is recited and the bread is cut into individual slices, and the one who recited the blessing and cut the bread reaches first to take a slice, and the others then follow. And this is where the Bryce is teaching that not only are the other diners forbidden to eat from the bread before the one who recited the blessing eats, which is what Rav is saying, they are also forbidden to take a slice without eating it before the one who recites the blessing takes a slice. And the Vilna Gaon says that the Brisa qualifies the ruling and states that the one who recites the blessing may grant this honor of taking the first slice to another. And the granting of this honor is limited to the taking of the first slice. And even so, one who was honored remains forbidden to eat from that slice, as stated by Rav, until the one who recites the blessing takes and eats the slice first. So you have to always keep in mind what Rav said, that the person who said the blessing first really needs to complete the blessing when you're talking about something that's going to be from something that's shared. Now, the Gemara is going to relate, and Rav, says the Gemara, when he would recite the blessing and cut the bread, he would taste his piece with his left hand and divide the other pieces to those eating with his right hand. And since the other diners are prohibited to eat, says Haredim, from bread even after it is given to them until the one reciting the blessing eats from his piece first, Rav would eat with his left hand while giving out the bread with his right hand so that the other diners could eat as soon as they received their slices. That's going to be Rav's practice. And the Gemara is going to continue, and the Gemara is going to cite a ruling regarding one who spoke between the hamotzi blessing and when they actually ate the bread. And Rav Huna said, if one recited the hamotzi blessing before tasting from it, said to the people dining with him, take a piece of the blessing, take a piece of the blessed. In other words, he bid his fellow diners to take a piece of the loaf, over which he recited the blessing. His remark does not constitute an interruption between the blessing and the eating, and he does not need to repeat the blessing. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, but if one said, give grass to the oxen, his remark does constitute an interruption between the blessing and the eating, and he must repeat the blessing. So if he's talking about something totally off topic to the eating of the bread, like the oxen, the field, something like that, well, you got to say it again. You have an interruption. There's a hefsek. If you're doing something where you're saying something like an interruption, saying, hey, take a piece of this blessed bread, yes, you said something, but it's in continuity with the blessing of the bread and the intention of getting the bread to be eaten and to be used is still intact. The intention didn't get taken away from that. So kavanah really matters, and even if you said something, as long as this kavanah is part of the using and doing of this mitzvah, permissible. But once you've totally changed the topic to something totally unrelated, the kavanah has been broken and it becomes a hefsek, and you have to do it again. Gemara says that a second Berechot related ruling by Rabbi Huna gets brought up, and the Gemara says Rav Huna said this shatisa, or this ground murta, one recites she'akol nieh bidvaro over it. Now, what is shatisa and what is ground murta? Shatisa is a beverage that, says Haredim, is made from flour of kernels that were toasted while it's still moist. And the flour remains sweet when it's mixed with oil, water, and salt, and it makes something called a shatisa. And the identity on the murta is more obscure, and there's a lot of suggestions by the commentators, but it's hard to know exactly what that was. But perhaps it was some sort of barley thing that after it was boiled to make a drink, that the barley remained and they could still use it in some form. If you go to the Makolet, you can find non-alcoholic barley beverage, and it turns out to be a very, very ancient beverage. They would roast the barley, and they would grind it up, or they would just boil it, and the liquid becomes black, and you can drink it, and it's nutritious. In fact, a lot of the way that calories was given in a day when you didn't have clean water supply was that they would drink this as a substitute to water, and it also gave them their calorie content and nutrition content. And even up until the 1800s in the UK, they were still serving school children beer in the schools because it was a way to guarantee that the water system was clean. They couldn't just give you a glass of water. And part of the problem is that the plumbing pipes weren't done in an efficient way yet, and so you couldn't just open up a tap and drink water. That you had a risk of getting sick. But if you were eating and drinking something that was like a boiled beverage, where they were boiling in barley, or it was actually beer, that you could drink it like water and get your water content for the day, and also nutrition. Now, there's the idea is that this beracha is going to be that if they're taking this ground up meal that was used after they made this like barley water, that you're going to say she'akol nieh bidvaro over it. That's the idea. Now, the third beracha that's going to be cited by Rav Huna, and by the way, in this kind of era, you don't want to just waste food. So they would be taking this barley water leftover, the barley, and trying to do something with it. And, don't think that this barley water was something that, was uncommonly used. Actually, it was used, and very frequently, because getting clean water back in those days is not as easy as you think. And they would notice that you couldn't get sick if you were taking and making a beer compound, or you were taking the barley, toasting it, and making it, boiling it, right, into a malt beverage, even if you didn't ferment it, and that you would serve it. That you could do a large volume of it and make sure that you have a lot of nutrition, but also clean water. So it was not as uncommon as it would seem to the modern viewer, but it was actually, when you look in history, it was actually very common. Now, there's going to be a third beracha related by Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, if one placed food in his mouth and forgot and did not recite a blessing, the law is as follows. If it is a liquid, he must spit it out. And if it was solid food, he shifts it to the side of his mouth and he recites a blessing, and then he swallows it. Now, it's interesting because he has to shift it to the side. It's effectively like changing the place. In other words, he's actually making a very conscious recognition that, hey, it's there in his mouth. He shifts it to the other side of his mouth so that it's like, it's like in a different place. And then he says a blessing, and then he can finish it. In terms of the liquid, that's going to be something where, how can you say a blessing when you have a liquid in your mouth? You can't speak with a liquid in your mouth, and even if you did, it would get all over the place, and you couldn't actually pronounce the words. There's going to be a question here, though, about this when you're talking about something in your mouth. Now, in Tehillim 71:8, the verse is teaching that when you praise Hashem, one should have nothing else in his mouth other than the praise that you are saying. So, how could you say a blessing when you have something in your mouth, like food? So here's the opposing opinion. Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Mari, in the name of Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Avin, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, even in the case of solid food, where one could conceivably shift the food to the side of your mouth, he must spit it out, for it is written, my mouth shall be filled with your praise all day long with your splendor. And again, that's from Tehillim 71:8, but from here we learn that one should only recite the blessings loudly and clearly with a full mouth, and that you shouldn't mumble the blessings. And that's also going to be echoed in the Mishnah Beur in 172:7. And Yerushalmi is maintaining that Rav Huna and Rav Yitzhak are arguing. Now, in the Bavli, in the parallel there, on page 50b, it's going to reconcile the two rulings, and it's going to do it like this. Here's how they're going to match it up. The Bavli argument is going to be that both are agreeing that ideally one should not have anything in their mouth when they say the blessing. Everybody agrees with that, and all agree that in the case of a type of food that it would not be considered repulsive if they spit it out, like a hard candy, that you should spit it out. There's no disagreement on that. And then they should say the blessing, then should eat the food. And that's what Rabbi Yitzhak's saying. But in the case of a food that would be repulsive to spit it out, like if you were eating berries, right? And that's actually the example that Rambam uses in his Hilchos Brachos 8:12. Everybody agrees that they should shift the food to the side of the mouth, recite the blessing, and then swallow the food. And that's what Rav Huna is saying. This, by the way, you can see more about this on commentary from the Haredim about this. He's continuing that the Gemara ruled that in regards to liquids, one should spit them out, and even though it would go to waste, in the case of the Bavli 50b, it rules that in the case of liquids, he swallows them. This statement is understood, says Haredim, by many Rishonim to mean that he swallows the liquids without a blessing. And the Haredim says, according to these Rishonim, the Bavli maintains that it is better to eat without a blessing than to waste the food. Okay, that's going to be also echoed by Rashi in 50b. So that's going to be a case where you have a lot of intricacy there, and so it's always better to ask a posek and to check the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the blessing for wheat and rice are going to get discussed, and it says that one who chews and swallows whole wheat kernels recites over them Bore Mine Zeronin. That's going to be that basically it's going to mean that one who creates the species of seeds. And this, by the way, is going to echo the view of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, where he's holding that herbage is going to be a subcategory of fruit of ground, and that is going to require its own blessing. So that's going to be in support of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara is going to say, if he ground the wheat kernels into flour, baked them into bread, and then cooked them in a pot, the law is as follows. If the pieces of bread are intact, they are still considered bread, and therefore he recites them over them, Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, and afterward he recites the 3 blessings of Berechot Mazon. So what are they talking about here? They're talking about like a bread pudding. So a lot of times they would have leftover bread that they made, they couldn't use it, and what they would do is they would put it into a pot, and they might put in some eggs and milk, and they would turn it into like a custardy dessert. They might put in some raisins, and they could keep the bread reused and turn it into a dessert, get another use out of it. They might, in the pot, wrap this bread in a moist towel so that it doesn't dry out. And you can find a lot of recipes from the 17 and 1800s from, in bread puddings. And so that's what they're describing here. It's a way to get, constant use out of bread, even when the bread goes bad and is old, not moldy, but just stale. So in this case, even over the bread pudding, basically they're saying that you would say Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz over it, and afterward, so perhaps maybe they didn't put raisins in it, but perhaps in this bread pudding, maybe they topped it with honey when they were serving it. So perhaps they took this bread and they mixed it with egg and a little bit of milk, and then it was already baked as bread, and then they steamed it with some, or maybe not. Maybe they just wet the bread. Maybe they just wet the bread with water, and they wrapped it in a wet towel, put it in a pot, and steamed it. And then afterward, and this is really a poor man's version on it, and then they sliced it into pieces and topped it with honey. Well, it's still going to have this intact thing of hamotzi. It's not dressed up with, trying to fancify it by cooking it with raisins and things like that. It's really like, even if you didn't have, access to milk and eggs or raisins, still a valid way to try to turn the bread into something useful. And the Gemara says that if the pieces of bread are not intact any longer, having dissolved into the cooking, they are no longer considered bread, and therefore he recites over it Berei Minei Mesanot, and afterward he recites the 1 blessing abridgment of 3. Now, have some soups that can be made. It was made in the ancient world where they would take stale bread, and they would put the stale bread into the soup and cook it, and it basically would dissolve into the soup and thicken it. They were called bread soups, and basically you couldn't identify it as bread anymore, and they're still using the bread. They're not throwing it away. We don't really cook that way anymore. We've become very rich, and we don't have these ideas or recipes. But this was very common in Europe and in the ancient world here. And bread is a lot of work to do, and chaval, it just went stale to not find use out of it, right? To just throw it away, that's no good. So this is a way that they would do it. They could dissolve it into the cooking. But when it gets dissolved into the cooking, it would have a different bracha on it. It would be mezanot. But afterward, he would recite the 1 blessing abridgment of 3. In other words, that he's basically effectively turning this into a porridge, or he's turning it into a soup, and it was made with one of these 5 grains. The Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to try to define the clause where it's talking about pieces that are intact. So the Gemara says, until how much can the pieces be disintegrated and still be considered intact? And Rabbi Yosei, son of Rabbi Avin, And Kahana, son of Malkiah, said in the name of Rav, until the size of olives. In other words, that the halacha would be that, hey, one who recites hamotzi, even over bread, it's got to be at least an olive size, but if it gets to be smaller, it would lose that status. And over here, when the bread is cooked, pieces that are smaller than the olive size volume lose the bread status, and it turns into a classification of a grain dish. So in the case of actually, taking the dry bread or the stale bread and turning it into a bread pudding, where you're gonna take the bread and you're gonna moisten the individual pieces and stack them, and you're gonna take a wet towel and or wet linen, which is what they would have back then, and wrap it and then steam it. It would turn into a thing where you could still identify the slices. They would be stacked one over another, and then basically what you would do is you would slice this bread pudding, and the pieces there would still be the size of an olive. And then what could you do? You could drizzle over some sort of thing, probably like honey, and still get use, turn it into a dessert. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say up until how much can the pieces be disintegrated and intact. And Rabbi Yosei, son of Rabbi Avin, they're saying in the name of Rav, until the size of an olive. And we've been covering that it's this olive size that's going to be really what's going to be triggering what's going to be bread and what's not. In other words, we know that the menachos could get ground up into smaller pieces, but it's the size of the olive that's going to be triggering the validity of these things. And so too over here for bread, that it's going to be the olive size that's going to be triggering the bracha, and that if everything lost its shape and size, was boiled down, boiled away, and it was less than the olive size, then it's not going to be bread anymore. So the Gemara is going to move on to the Baraisa, and it's going to say, one who chews and swallows whole rice, recites over it Berei Mene Zeronim. And again, as we were talking about, this is going to reflect the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who's holding that it needs a special blessing as a subcategory of fruit of the ground. Now, halachically, the accepted opinion is going to be of the rabbis, and the rabbis have a more lenient thing that in general it's going to just be Berei Paradama. It's not going to have this extra category. But nonetheless, we want to know what the other opinion is, because it helps us to understand the whole picture better. The Gemara says, if he ground the rice into flour, baked it into rice bread, and he cooks it in a pot, even though the pieces of rice bread are intact, it is still considered rice bread. And he would recite over it, Beurim Mene Mezanot. He does not need to recite a blessing afterwards. In other words, that bread is going to be from the 5 species. Now, there's rules on it. It has to at least be 51%. It has to have the taste of the other grain. That's one of the 5 species. In other words, if you're making where the 51% is going to be wheat, and then the 49% is going to be rice, well, it still has to have the taste of wheat in there. You have to be able to discern the taste of wheat in order to call it bread. And also it has to have a majority mixture. So even if sometimes maybe you didn't have enough wheat flour available, maybe you had to mix in some rice flour. Now we know that there's a story in Bavli Pesachim about the Kuthians who used to make the matzah out of and the challah out of the rice flour, and they would say the brachas over it, and they say the wrong brachas on it. But nonetheless, if they're making it out of rice bread, it's going to be mezanot, and they don't say the blessing for bread after. That's the idea. Now, the Gemara is going to cite a different ruling regarding the blessing over cooked rice. Rabbi Yerushalmi said one says Borei Pri Adama over the rice, and Bar Marina in the presence of Rabbi Zera and in the presence of Rabbi Chia Barva recited the She'ekol Ne'eh Bidvaro blessing over the rice. Rabbi Shimon Chasida says one recites Borei Mene Me'adamim, which means who creates a variety of delights. Now, there's a lot that can be done with rice, and rice can be turned into a porridge. It could be cooked as individual kernels. It could be turned into something that gets turned into like a jelly that could be used for desserts. There's a lot you can do with rice. Now, the Gemara is going to try to figure out these different possibilities and try to figure out what was actually said, because they want to understand, hey, wait, in what circumstance was this blessing made, and is that going to be, the halacha for it? In other words, Rabbi Yerushalmi was showing what is the halacha, but exactly which type of rice was being used. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Avin, says, and they were not arguing. So again, no disagreement. Gemara says, one who says, Borei Mene Mesanot, which is what we say in the Brisa, refers to rice that is made in a block. In other words, the rice is ground into flour, baked, and then cooked to the point where it gets hardened into a block. And that's going to be like a chunk. And the Yerushalmi is of the opinion that mezanot is recited on rice only when it's in the form of bread, just as grain merits the hamotzi blessing only when it's eaten in the form of bread. So that's going to be the clarification by the Haredim, and on that about being made into a block. And he continues in the Gemara. It says one who says Borei Pri Hadama, which is what Rabbi Yerushalmi is saying, refers to rice that is distinct, where the kernels are still whole after cooking. In other words, it's the type of rice that you're accustomed to if you're going to eat Chinese food or you're going to eat Japanese food or Indian food, and the rice is going to be there as an accompaniment to the side dish, where there are going to be individual grains of rice that are going to be next to your meal. And that's what he was saying the bracha on. Then there's another case, and Gemara says the one who says She'ekol Ne'eh Bidvaro, which is what Bar Marina was saying, refers to rice that was cooked extensively to the point that the kernels are no longer whole. In other words, that it was turned into a porridge. And in China, that's the breakfast in China. It's called kanji, and they take the rice and they cook it so much that it turns into like an oatmeal or a porridge, and then they put toppings on top of it. And 1 billion people eat that for breakfast. Gemara says, and one who says Borei Mene Me'adamim, which is what Rabbi Shimon Chasidu was saying, that's referring to rice that was cooked so much that it jellied. In other words, that the rice changed the original state, and it's going to be a change for the better. And the Haredim says that the dish, because it's a change for the better, merits its own unique blessing because it improved, and that would be Borei Mene Maha'adamim. So perhaps they're doing this to turn it into like a dessert. I've seen this, by the way, in China, where they cook it so much they turn it into a jelly. There's also a very famous Japanese dessert called mochi, which it's basically boiled a lot and then pounded with a hammer and turned into a jelly, and they mix in with it some green tea powder and some sugar, and it's delicious. Anyway, so it does get improved, and they're used as, it's definitely everywhere that they do this kind of thing, it's considered an improvement. And so that's why it's going to be with this blessing. And the Gemara continues and says, thus far we dealt with the blessing over jellied rice in the beginning before one eats it. And what blessing do you say at the end after you eat this jellied rice? Rabbi Yonah said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Chasida, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who creates varieties of delights, to delight with them the life of every being. Blessed are you, Hashem, for the land and for its delights." That's what you say after it. Now, just like in Japan, they're saying that jellied rice is a delicacy and it's meriting a special blessing before and after it, and it's a lot of hard work to do, but boy, is it delicious. And the Gemara agrees that it's a delicious thing. It really is delicious. So if you can find some kosher mochi, or you can make it yourself with your kids, it's worth doing. It's really very good, and it might be a nice thing to try with your family. Having cited Rabbi Shimon Chasida's novel ruling on, taking this thing and then improving it, right? This rice isn't just rice; they've improved it into a new state. This jellied rice, it would be like mochi in Japan. The Chinese have something that's like it as well. And the Gemara is going to have another ruling. The Gemara says, Rabbi Abba Bar Yaakov said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak the Great, Rabbi, when he would eat meat or eggs, would recite after it, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who created numerous living things to maintain the life of every being. Blessed are you, Hashem, the life of the worlds." So Rebbe is maintaining that, says Mara Fulda, that Borei Nefashot blessing is recited only after eating foods that were created as living things, such as meat of an animal, which was once alive, and eggs have the potential for life. That's going to be the idea here. And the Gemara says, thus far we dealt with the blessing over meat or eggs in the end after one eats them. And in the beginning, before you eat the meat or eggs, what does one recite? Rabbi Chagai says, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who creates the species of life." In other words, that, it's the correlation of what Rebbe is saying after eating, meat or eggs. Now, Rabbi Chagai's ruling is going to get challenged. Rabbi Yossi challenged Rabbi Chagai and says, but the following Mishnah argues with your own ruling on vinegar, on novellos, which are going to be a type of immature date. And on locusts, one says, she'akol neye bedvaro. Now, is this locust not a species of life? And nevertheless, the Mishnah rules that she'akol is recited beforehand, not who creates species of life. And the Gemara ends that and says that there's no answer to this challenge. In other words, that it would look like Rabbi Chagiga is refuted, and perhaps it's just Rebbe's just talking about in a case of meat and eggs. I don't think that grasshoppers even then were considered to be a delicacy or on the same par with eggs or meat. So maybe it was less desirable, although it was kosher, it was considered less desirable. But nonetheless, the Gemara doesn't answer the challenge. Anyway, tomorrow we're going to get more onto dealing with things on the 5 species and Borei Minei Mezonot, because this is really a very important blessing to cover, and it's one that we say a lot. And we're going to get into more about other species like with legumes and things like that. But brachas are some of the deepest things that exist in Judaism. We take it for granted, but you can see how intricately it's connected with the creation and agadic things on the 6 days. And you can see how intricately it's connected with actual performance in Menachos and in the temple. So there's a lot of ideas running through here, and it's really worth putting in the effort and the time to study brachos. And everybody likes to study, these more complicated and fancy things, but this is actually, in many ways, one of the deepest things in Judaism.
And I think that's why Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that you should spend at least 2 years, in addition to whatever you're doing, to really accustom oneself to concentrate on saying the brachas with a lot of kavanah. So have a great day.